in the initiative, of course, which is a wonderful initiative.
Now I have the sort of daunting task of trying to introduce Dr. Porterfield. He's an amazing guy. I mean, so I'm just going to give you the tip of the iceberg, and I'm going to ask him as sort of our first question to explain a little more about how he got to be the person that he is. So the thumbnail sketch is that Dan is the president and the CEO of the Aspen Institute, which is a global nonprofit organization committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. He's a native of the city of Baltimore, where he was raised by a single mother at the height of the civil rights movement. He's also a Rhodes Scholar, and he's been recognized as a visionary strategist, transformational leader, a devoted educator, and passionate advocate for justice and opportunity. Dan previously served as the president of Franklin and Marshall College, so he has some of the same DNA of most of us on this call, where he led the college in tripling its percentage of incoming low-income students and doubling its percentage of domestic students of color. He was named a White House Champion of Change in 2016. He holds bachelor's degrees from Oxford and from Georgetown, and he earned his PhD at the City University of New York Graduate Center, where he wrote his dissertation on the poetry of American prisoners. This is so for a guy who grew up in engineering, this is really fascinating to me. He's also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Dan, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and not be hesitant to tell us a little about your journey, which brought you to the realization of where you are now.
Thank you, Rick, and it's great to be with all of you. I'm meeting some of you for the first time, but to being in the company of Paula Johnson and Rogan Kirsch and Clayton Spencer again is an incredible pleasure. Three leaders I've learned so much from what they do. Paul and I last time we were together was at a panel at the Aspen Institute. Seems like a long time ago. And you were only in your second year, I think, or maybe the beginning of your third year. And the stuff that you've been doing, Paul, is mind-blowing. Way to go. And I also want to introduce you to Maria Acebal, who's in a new role that we created at the Aspen Institute. It grows out of versions of this role that we created at Georgetown University. In some ways, I was in your role, Maria, at Georgetown, and then at Franklin and Marshall, because what Maria does with extraordinary accomplishment and skills is to help the Institute think about how to leverage our many different assets in order to drive change at an even more significant way in areas of priority. And that work of strategic development is not always called out within complex institutions, but to have a person who's helping to bring out the best in everybody by helping us join forces where possible and build concepts that grow out of our strengths, but are relevant for the world we live in today and are maybe of bigger value. I also think an awful lot of real philanthropy responds to very well when you have a colleague like Maria, who's a partner to all the other leaders, to help build the concepts that have resonance for those that we're seeking to engage for investment. And that we're not just seeking to engage for investment, that we're trying to listen to so that our concepts are as good as they can be. So I invited Maria to come with, shame on me, no preparation of any type. She didn't even know what the meeting was because she's in DC and I'm in Aspen. So Maria, thank you for jumping in. And Rogan, her daughter, is killing it at Wake Forest. I had a chance to visit with her in the spring, and pretty amazing what you were able to pull together in the middle of a whirlwind. I know everybody else here has been doing that too, but I heard it directly from Maria's daughter, Nina. So, Rick, answer to your question, I don't exactly know where to start in a way that will be helpful for you, but I know you're all here to think about some important questions about can CLTE become a movement, and if it is to become a movement, how might you frame it and launch it and choreograph expansion and what would it take to sustain it? What kind of structure? Those are big questions I know you're working on today. I'll try to say a few things that are relevant to that. And I'm going to mostly speak kind of a little bit fast and off the cuff. And Rick, I'll just go push it back to you to ask questions, and then for the members here to ask questions that could be helpful. But you all are leaders in your campuses, and I don't think there's anything I'm going to say that's all that different than what you already know and have been living every single day. So as Rick said, I did get into educational opportunity through my mom, a single mother who went to Towson, then Towson College in Baltimore when she was in her 30s, and while raising my sister and me. And like many other single moms, every time she got a degree, she was ready for the next one. And so in her mid 30s, she got a master's degree in history from University of Maryland while working in the day. She was so good that they invited her to join the PhD program. And so she got her PhD in her 40s from University of Maryland. And her dissertation, which was labeled as not history, was history. It was one of the first studies of the experience of sex workers in the American West. And it was published by University of Illinois Press. She was, in her mid 40s, and it was kind of hard to get a job, even with a great dissertation. And she ended up learning sign language and teaching at Gallaudet for a period of time, published more books, and eventually was recruited by Utah State to edit the Journal of Western History. And she retired as an emeritus professor, passed away a couple of years ago. And she wrote about women prisoners in the West, women nuns in the West. And I only start with that story, it's relevant to me for a million reasons. Growing up, in a low-income community and seeing racial conflict all around as white families left Baltimore City fast, where we lived, and then it got better when it became integrated. But seeing a mom do that through education, develop her promise, contribute to our country, help redefine what is history. And get two kids, on the path to college, so that when we went to Georgetown, my sister and me, we just looked like, normal kids at Georgetown, even though actually we were propelled there by a mom who was able to propel us because she had access to a fantastic college education at Towson and then at University of Maryland. And then when I was at Georgetown, I had, maybe you had this feeling, all of you. When I graduated from Georgetown, I believed that I went to the perfect place on the planet Earth for me to develop what was inside of me. And I knew that there were 15 professors and members of the Jesuit order that had invested time with me personally, knew and valued me, that saw the things where I needed to develop and were a part of that in my life, and who actually had enough faith in me that gave me faith in myself, and even more maybe because they showed respect for me. I then, people you respecting you changes the way you see yourself. And I didn't have the vocabulary of mindset at that time to describe what I took from that experience. But I would say that it's been, for me, that undergraduate education has been like a stock that has gotten ever more valuable every year as my life has required me to deal with more complexity and to try to do work, in an ever increasingly more challenging context. I draw on that education every single day. What I learned, yes, but especially how I came to leave the institution with a sense of self-confidence, with experiences to draw upon, and with mindsets to make a difference. And I want that for everybody. And that's really been what became like my life story was, I hope, at least the one I want to tell is about trying to invest in the education of the young, in college and before college and out of college. I've taught in prisons. I worked with recently arrived immigrants a lot from Central America. I spent a lot of time working with Opportunity Youth in DC. Eventually decided a PhD was better than getting a law degree, running for office, losing, trying to find money, losing again. So to try to shape institutions so that they can bend and respond to the needs of the students in the world. And I'm going to stop there, Rick, but that's sort of the pathway. I mean, I'll say one last thing. When I was in my PhD program at the Graduate Center of CUNY, the chancellor, whose name was Ann Reynolds, a legendary figure, needed a speechwriter. They called the Graduate Center called the English department, and I went up to her office and started writing speeches for her. She had been the chancellor of the Cal State system and was a titanic figure. And I learned a little bit about sort of the complex higher education institutions from 2 years with her, which led to my having the chance to join the Clinton administration and work for Donna Shalala for 4 years as her chief speechwriter and then her communications director while I was finishing my PhD. And so those two experiences of working for Secretary Shalala and Chancellor Reynolds were unbelievably formative when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. I think from the Jesuits, I developed an ethos about how to work with students, which is probably the most important gift I've gotten after the love of my family. But from Donna and Ann, I began to learn about moving institutions, as you all know. And you know, we all need mentors, and they now it turns out they're getting younger as we get older. It's our students that are the mentors. So after working at HHS with Donna for 4 years, I then went back to Georgetown and worked for Leo O'Donovan in a role like Maria's, kind of his head of strategy. And then for Jack DeGioia, who's president now, I was there for 14 years. And then I was at Franklin and Marshall for 7.5, and now at the Aspen Institute for 3. Okay, thank you, Rick. I hope I didn't outwear my welcome here. Wear out my welcome.
Absolutely not. This is a group of people who are passionate about life transformative education. And to understand life transformative education, you have to have a personal story, and it usually involves transformation of your own. And if you can't see the life transformative feature of education in Dan's heart, you probably weren't looking. Dan, I would like to switch gears a little bit and talk about your current role at the Aspen Institute. When we talked a couple of weeks ago, you were explaining to me that the Aspen Institute has something like 70 different organizations that you wind up curating and mentoring and working with. Most of them are social entrepreneurship ventures of some kind, and a lot of them have education at the heart of it. Almost all of them have an aspiration to move the needle in America for the better, to create some kind of a movement. But you've had the privilege of watching them over time and seeing the patterns of behavior that tend to correlate with success and the patterns that don't work out so well. And since we're right at a crossroads right now, I thought you might be able to share some wisdom that we could learn from as we're making strategic decisions.
Sounds good. And so as you heard in the introduction, the Aspen Institute, what Rick said is drives change towards a free, just, and equitable society. And that's actually a new framing of our mission that we've worked on over my first couple of years here. We had a good framing before, but we've repositioned the Institute just a bit. I'm not going to go into the details about that because but I'll be happy to later if you want. But every aspect of organizational leadership, I think, requires being able to map the assets of the organization you're a part of, understand the values that run through the organization. I think we're all responsible for developing a theory of the brand of our organization and trying to attend to that brand and develop it and grow it. And by brand, I mean, how are we viewed and valued by others? And how do we, by values, I mean, what are the animating commitments that live across time within an institution? And by assets, I mean all the different strengths and people and practices and narratives that make up an institution, its capabilities and its aspirations. So all of us are responsible for that. And one of the best things about starting a new job is you can jump in and take the risk to call out to people, hey, what's going on here? What are the core values? How do we understand our assets? What is it that we want those that depend upon us to see in us, and how do we want them to value us? And then, importantly, what kind of an organization actually organizationally are we? Are we a network? Are we an association? Are we a what? And you do have to understand, I think, the structure of an organization in order to pull the levers for change effectively. So the Institute has been around for 70 years. It was formed in a moment of idealistic humanism after World War II, with nuclear devastation and genocide and world war as sort of like the presenting anxieties. That makes these days look like pretty good. And the people that brought it together did it under the theory that there'd be a value to unite the private sector and academics in sort of practical and philosophical conversations about what makes a good society. And out of that origin, 70 years later, 75 different programs have been developed by people. And there's different methods of change and different theories of how you make change embedded in these programs. We're not a linear organization. We're a big tent animated by some values around civil discourse, practical progress, inclusion, but then the way we work ranges quite a lot. We have 13 leadership programs that focus on finding 35 to 45-year-olds who are at an inflection moment of their life where all their success has brought them to the point of wondering, what am I really going to do that's going to make a difference? And those 13 programs graduate, so to speak, about 300 people a year from this 2-year experience of values-based leadership development. There's about 3,500 alums of those programs, and 7 of them ran for president in the last cycle. Many are CEOs, many are college presidents, and many are making differences on the ground that are incredible. We have 30 programs that are not now leadership programs with the networks that those programs become, but are policy programs that focus on practical solutions, neither red nor blue, to important issues. I won't go through it all because we'll be here for a long time, but our College Excellence program led by Josh Weiner is known to some of you, I think. And among other things, Josh is one of the nation's leaders in community college excellence. It's incredible things he's doing. He runs a presidential academy for community college presidents, newly selected or on the road to being selected, that is quite eminent. But we work in public health, we work in inclusive economic development, we work on global security, we work on misinformation, we work with a variety of different kinds of young people, great program for Native American youth, a big one for opportunity youth, strategies for helping low-income parents, a whole wide range of programs. And those programs have different methods of change, but they have to be nonpartisan. But they all different theories. Some do collective impact, some do narrative building. Some are developing networks of practitioners like community college presidents and putting them into programming, as I said before. Some are holding convenings that bring people together across the various divides. Some are identifying emerging rising leaders and investing in their development. It's just quite a wide range across those 30 programs. Then we have our public programs. The famous one is the Aspen Ideas Festival. But we have a lot of other ones that we do on climate change, on the future of cities, on social ventures. And this is one of our more well-known parts of the Aspen Institute. I'm on the Aspen campus now, which is located in Colorado. I'd love to host any of you who, like Paula, could come out here sometime. We start the Aspen Ideas Festival this Sunday night. It's kind of it's a hybrid, both in person and on the ground. The on the ground is light because we didn't even know we could do it 6 weeks ago. And we'll be back in business big time, I think, starting in the fall and certainly into the winter. Then finally, the biggest other area of work is we have 13 global Aspens that are united around this set of values of inclusive dialogues, strong civil society, free and fair elections, business sector being practically involved in change making. The first was Germany, founded 30 years ago. The most recent, Britain, post-Brexit. I think they're trying to bring themselves together in some new ways. But some of those are in some hot spots. We have an Aspen Ukraine. We have an Aspen Central Europe. We have an Aspen, India. We have Aspen, Mexico. So it's quite a range. And we add one every couple of years. So that's a big tent of a lot of different ways of driving change. And it's like universities and colleges, where you have these containers that within it hold all these different theories of change making, and some cases, people deeply committed to their mode of making a difference, to the point where they could even get into some methodological battles with one another about, why do you take your approach when my approach is a better approach? And I don't think we have it all that bad when it comes to that, but it is important to be an institution with a lot of capacity. I think that the book that you all may have been talking about, The Starfish and the Spider, identifies organizations that are like this, that bring unlike partners together and try to find the unifying framework that can allow them to add value to each other's work, at a minimum, to add value to one another's work. And hopefully to be organizations, because they have multiple kinds of capacities, that the people doing the work in the different lanes of work, when they get into that broader pool they're all part of, they actually grow as leaders. I think that I hope what you would want for CLTE is a growthful experience for all the members of it, where by virtue of being in it, you become different, because collaboration changes you from what you were before you collaborated to what you are when you collaborate. Let me stop, Rick, and ask you if there's a place you'd like to take it.
Okay, that's been a great overview. I've heard a couple of themes. One of them is having a coherent vision and paying attention to our so-called brand, so that others recognize in us what it is we're trying to do. I've heard of theory of change, understanding what it is you believe is the key that unlocks the door to moving the needle, and a wide diversity of approaches, ranging from leadership to policies to programs, and even an international reach. I'm wondering if maybe in 3 years, you've not had enough opportunity to watch, if there are rules of thumb, if there are observations, any sort of wisdom you can give us, like when is the right time to try to grow? How big is too big? Does size matter, or is it more about the passion and the commitment of the people inside the tent? What about a business model? Are there any issues with business models that are important?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about some of that from a Georgetown and F&M lens as well. I believe that first, that scaling is extremely important. And Maria is my partner with some others as we identify strategies to scale significant work of the Institute or our fellows. That's point one. And the journey to scale is very different than ideating and piloting, and early years of things. The journey to scale requires a kind of commitment and sophistication to develop a pathway. Some of it is iterative, but much of it must be planned in order to build value for the society, and then a structure that can deliver that value at scale. And that we have a lot of scaling that we're working on in different ways. One type of that is that our 3,500 fellows I told you about, they all do a venture at the end of their 2-year experience. And those ventures can be within their work, their jobs, or they can be outside of it. But everybody does it. It's part of being a values-based leader, is in dialogue with your cohort, making a commitment to try to do something in the world based on your values that can make the world a better place, and based on your privilege, and based on your power. These aren't kids here in these programs. And what we've developed an approach where we pick 5 or 6 of the ventures each year and pair the venture leader with one board member who scaled something professionally in order to help our fellows go to the next step. And these are not unambitious. One example, a guy named Cody Friesen has a technology that extracts the humidity from the air to make clean water. He's delivering clean water through this technology to Flint, Michigan. we're helping him. It requires a very large solar panels. We're helping him together with one of our trustees who's very significant person in water. We're helping him to see if we can make smaller panels so that that water could be delivered to huts and not just to municipalities. Those are the kinds of things. And these are like not one-off cool things. These are really significant businesses for a nonprofit. Point one. Point two, we have programs within the Institute that we're looking to scale. Maria is partnering with a colleague named John Dugan, who runs something that 8 of you are using right now. It's the Multi-Institution Leadership Survey, or MLS. And John is a former tenured professor from Loyola University. His research at Loyola was about evaluating methodologies, interventions to promote civic engagement and awareness and efficacy, and some of the things that actually that Keith was talking about in an educational program. About 300 universities pay to have your interventions evaluated in this program. Aspen Institute didn't create this program. John did, when he was a researcher. We recruited him to do something else for us, which he's doing, which is a great on-the-ground program he's leading. But now we're working to scale the MLS so that it can be utilized, whether for pay or for free, by schools, by youth programs, by anybody who's doing human capital development. And John would not be able to scale it as a professor. It just wouldn't happen. It requires a Maria and then a couple of different kinds of investors and partners. And we're going to rebrand the MLS as the Aspen Leadership Index. Our hope is that we'll be able to help many, many organizations bring the methodologies of impact assessment to this big, vague field of leadership development for the young. So I really think if you believe in what you're doing, if you really believe in it, it matters to step out of the work and say, can it be scaled? What would scaling look like? It's really worth it. That what I'm saying has not been the culture of the organization. We have really good programs, and they've been the programs. And with Maria's help and others, we said, well, great, these are good programs, but do you want to try to scale it? Do you want to take it to the next level? What could that look like? There's no single pathway. But I really admire what you're doing right now, because I think you're asking yourselves, do we have a concept here that is we know it's valuable for our campuses because you all say it is. Is it worth it to try to scale the concepts or the ideas that are associated with the CLTE? Now, let me say one more thing, and I'll stop. When I was at Georgetown, I basically learned on the job about branding and narrative building and sort of initiative management. All these different things we did. I had this crazy job. I was responsible for strategic development, which included things like helping to lead selling of a 100-year-old hospital or building a campus in Qatar. But I also was a professor of English, taught most semesters, and for 8 years lived in a dorm with my family. And I think Jack DeJoy would say this. So it was kind of like I was like the mayor of Georgetown's campus for the undergraduates, because I was teaching them and I was working on their projects with them, whatever they were, and there were a lot of them. And I was also participating at the strategic level as a senior person in the institution. It was, vertical integration, whatever they call it in business. I really just came to believe so deeply that these institutions are about people, and we have to always be investing in people and in people's understanding of what they can accomplish together. That it's not just about being, sort of professional managers. It's got to have heart and spirit and connection. The connection and relationships are absolutely pivotal to higher education institutions. If absent relationships, it almost inevitably becomes abstract or transactional. And so I learned stuff. I won't go into it all, but I was willing to live in a dorm and do my laundry in a in the laundry room with all the students with, you know, eight washers full of pink stuff because we have 3 daughters, and be in it, really in it. And it really changed my understanding that it's better to try to work collaboratively, to build networks, to work in a mode of sort of like building narratives, as opposed to the sort of command and control, let's go, the CEO will tell you what to do kind of approach. So when I went to Franklin and Marshall, I did what you're doing. I started with a set of values. I shared mine. I listened to the communities. I really listened. I went and talked to every department. The first 6 weeks, 80 meetings, from French to to athletics to the dining hall, everything. Listened to what was coming out of the school. It's a really good place, as you all know. And there were 2 things that were being said consistently. And one was from the faculty, we feel that our student body is uneven academically. There's a lot of kids that are less invested, more than we wish, put it that way. And secondly, can you help with that? And secondly, they said, yeah, it's a real shame that we only have about 6% students of color or 7% students of color, and they didn't even know about the Pell Grant number. But this isn't the right place, this place, because it's so damn hard. It's so hard. We don't want to hurt kids, but they might be underprepared by having them here. And I think that was coming from an okay place, not a bad place, but it was just 100% off. And my answer was, we can satisfy these 2 things with one strategy. You can get much more invested students, much more engaged, and you can have a much more inclusive student body. All we got to do is go recruit talent where talent is. And what is talent? And we talked about that. And we together agreed, this isn't me, we agreed that talent is students that want to invest in their education, that students that are willing to raise their hand and join, students that have resiliency, have dealt with difficulty, students have a vision of why they want to be together, what they want to do, not a plan maybe, but an openness, an aspiration, an openness. And the answer then was, okay, great. 95% of the country needs financial aid. 5% can pay $70,000 4 years after taxes. We're not putting enough into financial aid, and we're not going where the talent is in terms of invested kids that want to make a difference in life and want to learn and have proven they have resilience and optimism and a readiness to invest and say yes. And so in fast, like months, we all came together and said, let's do this. We tripled our financial aid budget, and we went out and made partnerships, which was my job, out in front at all these different schools and programs, public, private, charter around the country that were building those, that were emphasizing those qualities, those assets I just mentioned as talent. And our talent strategy took off. So what I'm trying to get at here is this, is that bringing people along, listening, synthesizing, and then distilling it to what can we do here? And the key is that word talent. In this case, almost every initiative has a keyword somewhere. And every initiative exists in a political space where there's baggage associated with lots of other words, where there's misunderstanding, where there's failed efforts from the past and anxieties about the change. The word talent, which, well, I don't think it was my word, I forget how we came up with it, but the word talent addressed everybody's anxieties. As we shifted our funding priorities to financial aid, it addressed the anxiety of the faculty that they would be working with students that weren't going to be successful, which was a stereotype, but they unlearned that pretty fast when they saw how engaged all these first-gen kids were that came. The word talent addressed the anxiety of the board, because the board didn't want to be, I'm going to put it bluntly, captive to some new president's social agenda. The word talent responded to the needs of the students, because in fact, it's quite difficult when a 19-year-old has a bad day or a bad week and they ask, why am I here? And the answer is, I'm here because they wanted my diversity for some other person. I'm the diversity for some other person. And I'm a huge proponent of diversity, equity, inclusion. But actually the student, especially the first-gen student, needs to believe that she has been seen and sought and recruited and invested in because of her talent.
Mm.
And in fact, to put it very bluntly, it makes a big difference for more privileged kids like mine to appreciate that the students that are first-gen students or that come from low-income backgrounds are the talent that we're recruiting. And my child's the talent too. But their education will be lesser if we don't have that talent. That framing for this opportunity addressed every single potential problem. And one reason we were able to move so fast is because people believed in it. They're like, yes, of course, talent. A school's about talent. How can it not be about talent? You know, a lot of alums said, hey, wait a minute. You know, I'm saying it not the way it was really said to me, but are you going to care about kids like my kids? Because I went here. Yes, I know, the world's more diverse now, but can my kids still go to F&M? So the answer back to that is, here's the qualities of talent we're looking for. Invest in those qualities of talent, which includes maximizing your education. We're the perfect school for your child if your child wants a great education. But you have to invest in more than just test scores. You have to invest in your child caring to maximize the learning opportunity and the growth, intellectual and personal, that comes from residential college experience. So I don't know what your key word is or words, but getting that right at the beginning is, I think, very critical to movement building. It's very valuable for expansion. And finally, if you have the framing right, then a movement is in part about scaling participation, but it's also scaling ideas. The ideas are the cheapest thing to scale. Scaling an organization often requires building stuff and employing people and reconciling all the issues of growth. But scaling ideas where others can then join you is cheap if you're scaling good ideas and you're effectively scaling them. And that's what leads to this thing called the American Talent Initiative, which a number of your schools are partners of it. It did come out of F&M's work, our talent strategy. I went to Mike Bloomberg's foundation and said, I went to a bunch of foundations who said, too bad you're not Arizona State. And I know Arizona State's here because you don't have scale, you little liberal arts college. A lot of people said that, many times over. But that's okay. You got to find the one that doesn't say what you don't want to hear. And Bloomberg's people said, this is interesting. What do you want to do? It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe have a conversation to see if we can get more schools to consistent with their approaches and their values to grow their access to low-income students. And we came up with a method to do that, which was to set a national goal of 50,000 more Pell Grant students enrolled in any school with a 70% or higher graduation rate over 10 years. And then we just invited colleges, do you want to be in it? And I didn't do all the inviting, but just who wants to be in it? We never pressured anybody to join it. There's about 130 schools that are in it. And they're all in their different ways seeking to grow their population of low-income students. We're counting, but we're not publicly identifying each school by its growth. There's no need for that. We're trying to get people in, not make them compete against each other or feel like they're under pressure. And there's a learning component to it as presidents and provosts and admissions deans get together a bit. I don't think it's the changing the world, but we have seen some progress at a lot of places, and we have a narrative. And notice what it's called. I didn't name it the American Talent Initiative. Bloomberg did, because he said, yeah, that's right. It's about talent. That's what the country has to do, cultivate talent. Okay, I've babbled on a little bit, but Rick, I took the opportunity to get in there because and sort of talk about this, because what you're trying to do is build an association of an affiliation of schools that are committed to something that is both discernible and perhaps a little bit abstract. And you're trying to see, how do we create an affinity with one another so that we can A, do our best work on our own campuses, B, learn and reinforce each other, and C, build a public narrative that supports what we're doing as critical for the value proposition of American higher ed. And then in developing that value proposition, not only are we hopefully generating some support financially, but more important even, we're reframing for students and faculty alike, what are we all about here? And so I do see this incredible thing here, incredible set of ideas, but it's pretty complex to distill it into an action plan.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Dan, I'm going to open this up to everyone here to ask questions, but I just wanted to point out for those of us who've been on this initiative for a while, that the idea of coming up with the key word, developing the concept that scales, that unlocks a door, that holds us together, feels like a journey. It's not an aha moment that occurs to you. It's an evolution. And you can see that evolution on our website, because we had this long paper, struggled with too many ideas at the beginning. It's gotten better now. It's with a lot of help from people on the steering committee. It's 1.5 pager, something like that. It has some key ideas. And I think it's on the way to developing that key word, which we need your help in order to get there. So I would like to ask anyone here who has comments or questions for Dan to just simply wave on screen and we can get started. Rogan.
First of all, as a committed ATI campus, Dan, thanks so much for your leadership there. I didn't know that the talent part of it came directly from you guys. Great points about students, especially. It's so valuable to hear reflections from a highly successful administrator's perspective. I want to go a slightly different direction, to go back to where you began with your powerful personal story. You told us, I'm paraphrasing, but 12 to 15 Jesuit faculty, really 3 things you said. They knew me, they cared about my development, and I love this, they showed respect for me. And what that affirms, and I think in these conversations, we occasionally forget that faculty are such a key component of this life transforming education we're trying to advance and instantiate on our campuses and so on. It leads me to wonder, and ask you to wonder aloud, if you wouldn't mind, whether that ethos can be taught. Can faculty members be taught, or at least encouraged, to transform students' lives, especially the kinds of personal connections you so eloquently testified to know and care about their students and to show them respect? Or if it's hard to teach, how can we better find those who are born to this and get them on our faculties?
Yeah, that's what a great question. I don't know if the word is taught yet, but 100% it can be modeled. Absolutely. And there's a whole literature, I think, about modeling that we could look at. 2, so A, can be modeled. 2, we can recognize it. And I really think that's important, because you call it out, you name it, you say, this is what we value this, which doesn't mean we don't value other things. It's not about hierarchy here. We really value it. So that's the second point. 3rd, we can build structures that, let me save structures. We can build some systems that facilitate faculty conversation about this so that they can lean into it and go through their own journeys. We created a Center on Faculty Excellence as a part of our Next Generation Talent Initiative, because we needed a space that was faculty driven, faculty created, for conversation about the changing student demographic and the necessary changes of pedagogy and of faculty composition that would ensue. And that center, the Mellon Foundation gave every president of a liberal arts college a little money to start. That's how I used it. It was the best $50,000 I ever spent to get that started, because the faculty have to own it. Exactly, Rogan, what you just said. So those are 3. So modeling, recognizing, and building systems. And then the 4th thing I would say is structures. And so where it's possible, and this is, every institution's got different things. But I lived as a faculty in residence at Georgetown for 8 years. That's a structure. Georgetown invested in having faculty on the campus with our kids, our pink laundry, and our dogs. And that really sends a signal. I wasn't a dorm faculty, I was a campus faculty. That's one. Differently is the structures we work on to create kind of very meaningful first college class experiences or capstone experiences, for example. Costs money, but if you can create those settings that bring kids and faculty close together, I almost think it's the best money we spend, is the mind-on-mind connection. But we have to be a little bit intentional, I think, with our faculty about engaging with faculty in a conversation about, well, who are our students today? Where are they coming from? What world will they be entering in terms of professional life? And it's easy for faculty to not be in that conversation, for it to be a student life conversation. I would really recommend putting faculty into the conversation about things like what is a career center today, different than it was before? What is the way that we ensure that students from underrepresented backgrounds can have that we intentionally try to create a sense of belonging? Very hard, but very important. So those are sort of my fast answers to that. And one of the things that made me so near tears moved on some occasions was that when we tripled that Pell Grant population at F&M, we did that overnight. It went from 8 to 17 or 7. It went from 7 to 17 to 20 in 3 years. And guess what happened though? So the faculty, it turns out a lot of the faculty are first-gen college students, but they had never drawn on that part of their identities explicitly. So we created some cohort groups. Faculty raised their hand. I want to do that. We had all these cohorts of first-gen kids with faculty mentors. And then the faculty created a group. I didn't ask them to do this. First-gen faculty allies. They did it because they were engaged with the kids. They saw themselves in these kids. And I was at a couple discussions of faculty who were students where I saw faculty members share their personal journey, and I saw other faculty with their jaws on the ground because they had worked for 20 years with somebody and they never realized that their father died on the street, or they never realized that they were a working class kid who almost flunked out of college. Here they are, like just the star of the government department. And so that, I think, there's real meaning ahead of this. We can improve the educational experience for students by personalizing it and connecting to these deeply felt human experiences that actually bring generations together. I may sound a little bit naive, I realize, but there's so much cynicism out there right now. If we have to be the antidote to cynicism. That's our single greatest position, I believe, right now, is that in a society that is riven and quite sad about itself and afraid to speak, higher ed has been swept under the rug as like it's either viewed as a kind of a privilege machine or a left-wing indoctrination machine or a corporate values machine. Those are all cynical takes on what's happening. But if we have to create the story that we want, we can't just tell the story, we got to create it with the next wave of actions that put students and faculty in the meaningful relationships that are transformational, that come through their learning and mentoring, put that at the center of our narrative, but build this is key, to build a narrative, we've got to have some facts. It's not just words. So the extent to which we can demonstrate success, document success, even measure success when it can be measured is really valuable to our story here. The only reason Mike Bloomberg invested in the American Talent Initiative, at least as far as I can tell, because when I was interviewing for this, was because I could tell him that the Pell Grant students at F&M were graduating at the same rate with the same grades, but higher success in getting selected highly prestigious scholarships. He wasn't going to move until he believed that we could demonstrate success and not just talk.
That's terrific. Dan, you just described my undergraduate mentor at the University of California. I didn't know his life story until he passed away from brain cancer in 2017. And I went to the funeral and I learned not only was he first generation, he was the first African-American athlete at Penn State and couldn't travel with the team. And there's all sorts of things about this fellow. No wonder he had empathy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
When I was a kid, by the way, I think I was just a typical boy. I got annoyed when my mom started teaching college, all these kids hanging around the house all the time. I was like, yeah, you got 2 kids, Mom. But she was practicing this. And so that's what I mean by modeling. You see somebody doing it, you realize that's important.
Mm-hmm. Are there other questions? Archie.
So I've been thinking a lot, Dan, and hearing your wonderful comments about what I think something we're going to have to grapple with, which is what I will call inclusion while scaling. So,
yeah.
I believe very strongly in where we are. But I think we also have to recognize that there's not been a lot of important voices who are going to need to be part of this that have been here now. You know, whether it's through the minority serving institutions, whether it's through community colleges, et cetera. And so how do you think about that scaling and inclusion and making sure those voices are heard appropriately? And how do you balance those two as you build a movement like this?
Yeah, so I thank you, Archie. And you know, I know at UT, you all are thinking about these issues constantly. And I've learned from David Yeager, among others there, and in fact, hosted him at F&M. I think that we have to put inclusion at the dead center of everything we do. And that's not easy because we're learning as we go. But if you think you can sort out for what you're doing today, for example, a way to include historically Black institutions and Latino serving institution and community colleges, I would definitely say do it. Do it. It's worth it. The journey's worth it. In terms of like faculty recruitment, transformational at Franklin and Marshall that we made some progress, because it's not just the progress, it's the symbol of making progress. The symbol of making progress motivates people to keep at it. That narratives are like words and deeds. And so you do things and you talk about it. You do things, talk about it. It's not just words, deeds, and symbols. And so it's very important for legitimacy in our society that we are inclusive. I think it's incredibly important. And inclusion takes a lot of forms too, including, in addition to what we've talked about, rural political inclusion, ability, everything. I think that when I was at Georgetown and I was responsible for the positioning of the school, I often said there were 3 narratives that we had to build every single year, and for internal legitimacy. And we had to do it every single year. And we had to do it to hold trust that we were stewards of this institution in a way that was appropriate. And those 3 narratives at Georgetown, this was 15 years ago, but they were: 1, that Georgetown is a place of academic and educational excellence. And we had to create new facts as well as amplify existing facts all the time, like a campaign almost. We're a campaign showing you we are serious about academic excellence. Point 2, inclusion. We're an inclusive community. We had to commit to that every single week of every single year, to the combination of words and deeds that would make that narrative self-evident. And then the 3rd was that we are an authentically Jesuit institution. And those 3 narratives for Georgetown were essential to the institution's internal communities believing the institution was what it says it was. You say, well, Dan, what happens when somebody, knocks over a crucifix, or when somebody writes graffiti that's racist, or there's a cheating scandal? Those are counterfacts to those narratives. Yes, they are, but they're anomalies. And that's what you're going to have on your campus. You're going to have anomalies all the time. If you don't have the narrative that bolsters the sense of what you're about, the anomalies end up defining you. I actually think that's what's happened in higher education. I think higher education has been defined by some anomalies, some exceptional controversies in some places, and where there's legitimate critique, we should be engaging it and getting better with narratives that respond to the critique, one of which is definitely that we're not inclusive enough. I don't know if that's a help, Archie, what I just said, but I think that this initiative, if it doesn't feel inclusive and it doesn't respond to the needs of students from all backgrounds, I think it won't be as successful.
Yeah.
But if it does do that, by the way, if it does do that, then you've come up with this approach for a new America. The country is evolving. We are needed more now than ever. The demographics are clear. So how do we create educational communities that allow young people in all their diversity and in all the intersectionality among that to feel seen and heard and valued and included and invested in and counted on and launched? And all that, we put all that together, and it feels inside like we see these kids and we're including them. And we're working against, we have challenges because some schools highly selective, some schools don't have the inclusion at the faculty level or at the senior staff level or the board level, or have histories with buildings with names we wouldn't want today, all that. We have to work again, absolutely have to engage that. And I think that could be, though, a great thing for this initiative. If this initiative is about essentially the rising generations of our country, all of them, and what together they represent for the American future. But to engage, to create that future, to empower the young to join us, to create the country we want, we have to make sure that we create educational communities that respond to them in personal and humanistic ways, and not as numbers and not as problems. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done all that, because now I feel like I'm giving a speech to people that could give the same speech, but better.
This is great, Dan. I'm so glad we have this recorded. Are there other questions? Because we're running short here on time. Tom, your hand's up.
Yep. Dan, thank you for that really uplifting presentation and so many useful takeaways from all of this. Just a couple of quick questions, if I could. The Bloomberg funding, was that at a scale that paid for the organizational structure of ATI, or was it at a scale that paid for the implementation of going to scale?
Good point. What it didn't pay for is individual schools need to grow their financial aid budget.
Right.
But it did pay for, we hired, the Aspen Institute and Ithaca SNR together teamed up, and we've hired about 5 or 6 people now, some of them were kind of junior, to help us manage the development of this. So this is actually pretty nitty gritty and pretty important. We developed an MOU that schools sign. Says, if I'm joining, this is what I'm committing to. And the basic commitment is to growth of the Pell number, but whatever number you set, it's not about a quota or something. And then they commit to taking part in communities of practice, which is what you're going to be as you build this out more. It's a community of practice for sharing, for learning, for recognizing work and taking it to the next level. And so I don't think the ATI is like the only thing ever done or something. It's good, but I look for the next chapters in that, I hope. Well, what you're doing, you need enough staff to onboard other schools, to staff what you might want. You might want a steering committee. I'd probably recommend that. You might want to, so you need to staff your steering committee. You might want to like rotate co-chairs or something. And you need to be able to bring people together, which you can do now, obviously by Zoom, but also you want to get some physical presence. Yep. And then you might consider commissioning a paper or 2 every year or so. So you create some intellectual product that shows the value of what either some schools are doing or what the particular emphasis that you're coming up with has. You want some intellectual product, which also give you something for news cycles, so that you can say, look, here's things we're learning. Right. But I think I'm making this up, and so if I'm off, don't even bother to tell me. Just ignore it. You want to make it easy for institutions to join. I think the barrier to entry should be clear, whatever it is: identified point person, a commitment to a couple kinds of projects, showing up at things. But you don't need to make it so that you have to climb a mountain to even get here. And by the way, if you do that, if you make it hard to get in, you're then going to have to deal with, what do you do when people don't keep the commitment they say they're going to keep? And so I would argue for a looser, inclusive, starfish strategy here. And then I would argue for some investment in resources so that you can collate meaningful achievements and disseminate them and share them, and some way to create enough convenings that you form an identity. Yep. Because that identity will then be brought back to these campuses. And you could recognize, you could give an awards. We don't do this with ATI. You could try to recognize people from time to time, faculty, students, organizations. You might consider together as leaders thinking, where are some of the, who do you want to influence to do what besides the campuses? So I know we want to create life transformational learning on campus and student development. And that's the most important thing we could do. That's why we're all in this. Who else do we want to influence? Do we want to influence boards? Do you want to influence other institutions? Do you want foundations or funders, corporations to see the value of this kind of education? I throw that out not to overwhelm you with stuff, but you want to build an agenda here where the world is sort of responding to the value that you're creating and disseminating.
Mhm.
So you need staffing for that.
Got it. Well, that's a really helpful answer. And actually you answered the second question I was going to ask at the same time, which was how do you create the flexibility to include many institutions and still have a commonality so that it makes sense to call it a single movement. And you spelled it out in your case of ATI. It's a common commitment to something as simple as a metric of growing the Pell number. Our metrics maybe not quite as simple, but that's going to be a great brainstorming session for later in this meeting.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing Clayton Spencer needs is something that Mike Bloomberg is paying for to tell her which students to accept.
Exactly.
That has to reside with the campuses.
Yeah.
I do think there could be something that I'll just say just because I admire what you're doing, that we do that engages faculty in some way so that you feel like there's some faculty champions here. And it's celebrating faculty that are and helping to our faculty models to be modeled, if you will, I think is very, very valuable. And I also would say that to the extent to which over time you think about how to include student voices, I think that's also very promising.
Mhm.
If they're in it, well, on a college campus. So how did I'm just stating it super directly. You can imagine that with the tripling of the Pell Grant population, we were not Eden for Pell Grant students overnight. By no means were we Eden. We had so much we had to learn, and we didn't even know what we had to learn. But we had a narrative. The narrative was, you're the talent. The country needs our school to do what we're doing. Well, we need your help, students, to figure out together, how do we co-create the things we need to do so we can grease the gears of the campus to respond to first-gen students' interests and needs, and so that we can develop new ways of being a great school. And so the fact that the students were very much partners and that it was a expressly explicit strategic priority, it was the defining priority pretty much, made it so that we could handle imperfection. Like, oh my God, you're right. We haven't thought of that yet. Oh, you couldn't be, of course we got to do something different in Career Center. Like, yes, let's do it. But the logic of leaning into to finding the next chapter together, that's the inclusion point Archie made. They were finding the next chapter together. I sort of think that what you're talking about is as old as America's first schools in some sense, because it's about this combination of personal and intellectual formation in a way that lets a young person feel that the greatness within her is coming out. And that sense of a greatness emerging, that I am emerging, I am part of, I'm seen and growing and changing, is what the feeling we all want our kids to take from college into the rest of their lives. And that idea is not a new idea. And like some tech guy came up with that and said, hey, look at this, isn't this cool? That's at the heart of America. Although we have to unlearn and lower the blinders that kept us from seeing that the same way for all students, or seeing that different student backgrounds require different strategies for cultivating that sense of an empowered self. And that's so important. That's a gigantic topic, really worth it. If you can frame this so something like that is what it's about. And then there's all kinds of ways of getting there, both because the schools are different and because the students are different.
Yeah, the schools being different, a great example, two conversations that I had. One was with Jack DeGioia. The UConn rejoined the Big East. And I met with the Big East presidents, and almost all of them were from Jesuit schools. And we talked beyond sports about what we might work on together academically. And I mentioned life transformative education. And what they resonated with was a piece of life transformative education we talk about, which is the whole student well-being all throughout life. But there's another piece too, which is the purposeful work that Clayton Spencer was talking about, and they both fall under what we mean by life transformative, but each type of institution hooks to a different thing, aspect of it. But
Yeah,
I think our
that's right.
keyword is life transformation. I don't know if it's a good keyword, but that's what it is as of now.
I think you're in a great place. What I like about that is it speaks to an aspiration.
Yeah.
A great initiative is striving, and is trying to make something that's authentic and relevant and critical for generations to come. It's like all those things together. And I think you're into it. I think you're into a great space with this. And maybe maybe my keyword point is almost overly stated for this purpose. It turned out we lucked into talent in a way, because I wasn't smart enough to go to F&M and say, we need a talent strategy. It was more, I was willing to listen to everything and have it emerge. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe it doesn't need that yet. I wouldn't want to seem simplistic. But I do know this, I will say this, that our students are different, right? Demographically, obviously, but developmentally, of course, 18 to 22 is everything. There's such a range there. And then our schools are different, our communities are different. So that difference is a strength. If it's not a strength, it'll be a weakness, because people will say, well, how do you accommodate for this or that? Who are you leaving out? But if we make we're living a dynamic of sameness and difference. That's what's happening. We're living this dynamic. All of us, we're living it constantly, painful sometimes. The schools are coming together to say, we want to own this dynamic of sameness and difference as it relates to student development. So we're helping all students, and that includes helping students where they are, not just where we wish they were, but where they are, or where society has left them, or what they want from us because of what society represents. And I think if you can keep that openness of spirit, it'll be your friend in this process.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to play the timekeeper here. As exciting as this discussion is, I feel really guilty about interrupting it. But we do have to move on because we have some things that we have to get through. Dan, I can't thank you enough. This has been truly inspirational, I think, for all of us. It's exactly what we needed to hear as we go into these detailed discussions this afternoon. And I hope that your schedule will allow you to continue to participate, even though we haven't talked about that, or at least you or Maria or both of you would be really helpful to us. What we need to do now in order to get through our agenda and still have time for dinner tonight